Awesome.
Orchard. Hey, Ron.
Hello, everyone.
You're on.
Gary, how you doing?
Ron.
Okay, well,
Michael, what you got going on there? Little construction, huh?
Who said that?
Ray.
That's Ray. That's me.
Yeah, I told the others that somebody has to be the clown in the group. This is the Oatfield house being torn down, and they told me I had to wear a hard hat while I was standing out here. So, hard hat.
All right. Good job.
so I guess I'll pass it over to Doug in a minute to get us started. We might have a couple more folks joining us, but a couple Zoom logistics. Just a reminder for folks, I'm sure you're all pretty adept at using Zoom at this point, but if it is distracting to have the Hollywood Squares view, you can always choose to do speaker view, and that's in the upper right-hand corner, and you can still see folks, but it'll just make whoever's speaking a little larger. Today we will be sharing, Jennifer will be sharing her screen at some point, but we're not going to have a lot of screen sharing. We had a really presentation-heavy 2 meetings. But today we're going to be focusing more on discussion. So choose whatever view works best for you. Make sure that you're able to see the chat box so that we can use that. You can also raise your hand in the panelist box. You have an option to raise your hand or hovering over your video, and those little 3 dots will give you the opportunity to raise your hand, and then I can see if you'd like to say something. Just letting you know, that gets a little chaotic for me sometimes, and I do miss them. So chat is a great way to let us know if you have something that you'd like to say, or just waving in your video so that we know that you have something you'd like to say. Shonda is calling in on the phone, so we'll make sure to let her know if something visually is happening that she can't hear. And I know we've got some folks observing the meeting today, so I can see Commissioner Savas is here joining us. Welcome, Commissioner, and I'm sure we'll pass it over to you for a couple words when we get to public comment. Any other Zoom logistic pieces?
I have
I
one.
think so. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
If you have your packets from the previous meetings, that would be great, because then we may not have to share the screen quite as much, and we'll be able to have more of a conversation tonight.
Cool. Doug, over to you.
That could mean all of us are going to be like this.
Okay, it's okay.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before we get started, we're going to do our roll call, make sure everybody's here. I just realized we need to do this. I had to find the roll call list again. So I'll read through the names, just indicate audibly that you're here. That way it's on the record. We want to make this as official as possible, even with some clowns in the group. So starting off with Ron Campbell.
I'm here.
Mark Elliott.
Hi.
Dennis Hickey.
Here.
Kim Parman.
Here.
Rose Ojeda. I didn't see her. Anna Hosley. How about Mike Schmier? Mike, I know you're here.
Present.
Okay, good. Yeah, you can mute after this, but for now, we need to know you're here. Christy Switzer. It's too nice an evening. Michael Newgard.
Looks like Christy just joined us, so she just got her audio connected.
Oh, okay, good. Christy, you're here? Yay, there's a wave. Does that count? We need an audible. Where did I leave off? Oh, Mike Schmier. Oh, no, I talked to him. Michael Newgard.
Present.
Grover Bornefeld. Oh, I got thumbs up. Okay. I can't see you, so. Jan Lindstrom.
Hello.
Doug Jones is here. Shonda Wild.
Here.
Paul Bundy.
Yep, here.
Am I saying your last name right, Paul?
Boundy, but close
Boundy.
enough.
Okay, I'll work on that. Gary Bukowski,
Present.
and that's our list. All right. Catherine, did you have anybody you wanted to introduce? You got it. We're gonna have to hear you first, Catherine.
Yeah, sorry.
That's right.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce the staff. I know that you've met almost everyone here, but also for people in the audience. So Amber Johnson is, she's on my stage left, bottom. Amber Johnson is from Public and Government Affairs. Laura Zentner, Director of Business and Community Services. Scott Archer's here. He's Director of NCPRD. We have a special guest tonight, Candy Ho from Recreational Services. Where are you, Candy? Will you wave? Mitzi Olson is our library director, and Jessica Boderin is taking notes for us and also taking notes on the chat box. That's it. And me, I'm Catherine Krieger.
I see Rose. Rose made it, so we can mark Rose as present. Hello, Rose. And let's see, Jennifer, do you want to introduce your team?
Sure. Tonight we have myself, Jennifer Hoffman, project manager, and Jim Kavlich, design partner, OPSIS. We have Ray Johnston of Johnston Architects, our library architect, and we have Kurt Lango with Lango Hansen, landscape architects, and I think that's it. I don't think Mona's joining us tonight. Is that correct, Ray? Right. Okay. Yep, that's it.
All right, great. So a busy night tonight. Next couple nights should be, we've got lots to go through. We're going to be answering some questions, going through some stuff that's already been asked, and then kind of looking over everything. Just a reminder, the meeting's being recorded. So if stuff goes by and you don't get a chance to, you need some clarification, the recording should be up and running soon. We had a meeting summary. I don't know if everybody had a chance to look that over, covering the last two meetings. Does anybody have any clarifications or corrections to make for that meeting summary? I don't see any, so I guess we will let that go from unapproved to approved.
Maybe if folks just want to indicate, they might need a little bit more time, but I see a lot of people looking at the screen. If you can indicate with a thumbs up that you're okay with the meeting summary being approved. Looks like a lot of thumbs up. And Shonda, did you have any edits?
Yes, it's okay. No, I don't.
Cool. Great.
Thanks, Shonda. So yeah, when we do get to any kind of voting things that are going on, as a reminder, we'll do the thumbs up and to call out to those who are only on audio to make sure everybody's getting their voice in one fashion or another. So I think at this point, turn it over to Jennifer.
All right. So you all have been very busy. Lots of great comments and lots of great questions. And obviously our presentation took 2 meetings and our question and answer will take 2 meetings at least. So we want to have a way to be able to have a good dialogue with you all tonight. We will share a couple slides on our screen and we can pull it up for reference if we need to from our presentation before, but we do really welcome some conversation and a chance for us to listen to what your questions are and a chance for us to respond. So I'll jump into this in just a minute. I don't know, Jim, did you want to have any other words to say before we get going? Kind of walking through our plan for tonight.
Yeah, we're just excited to have this opportunity to have a dialogue, as Jennifer said. This format's a little more unconventional, but very appropriate for the time that we're in with the virus and social distancing, this virtual format. So, we miss having this kind of exchange. And so we're looking forward to tonight and next week.
Okay, so before I start sharing my screen, I wanted to kind of set the table for what we're going to be talking about today and next week when we get together. We thought we would approach the questions that we have seen to date and then questions you might have coming into this meeting in a way that kind of echoes the presentations that we had. So tonight we do have a focus on a few topics that I'll go through in a minute, and then we're saving some of the other discussions for next week. So you'll be able to kind of judge where you want to step in. If you have comments, if we're not addressing something that you've asked and you feel like you want to ask, we're happy to do that. So let me share my screen here. Looks like hopefully you can all see that. Oh, great. I didn't lose you all. We've been struggling for me to manage both screens here. Okay, so one of the things that we found in the questions that we got, not only with the Concord group, but also with the Gladstone group, was trying to understand where we are in this process. And so we thought that putting together a description of this whole process in a little bit more detail would be helpful to you all. So, you know, we have a range of questions and maybe concerns from some about decisions that may be made or not made. So we thought it was important for us to share where we are in this larger process. So this diagram kind of spells out, we have a long road ahead of us. Right now, we're at the starting point. This master planning phase is a longer phase. We're taking almost a year to go through this, but the point we're at right now is this design alternatives. We'll be working through the rest of that phase, but we really haven't started the major design process that we'll be going through with you all. So the next phase that we'll move into, once we get through this master planning phase and everyone's comfortable with the scheme moving forward, when we get to that point, we'll go into schematic design. Schematic design is usually about 2 to 3 months long, and that's where we'll really finalize the major pieces of layout and start to develop the building character a little bit more. Then we move into the design development phase, and that's where we really start to look at refining those things, talking about materials, understanding in much more detail how things are solved, what implications are of the code and the planning process. That's a really important phase that usually lasts about 3 or 4 months. And from that, we move into our construction document phase, which typically is how we're putting documents together for a contractor to build the project. That's kind of the instruction manual. So it's drawings, it's specifications, it's the really detailed technical information that goes together. And that's usually about a 6-month process. After that, then the project's ready to be bid by contractors, subcontractors, goes in for permits. That usually takes about 3 months for permitting, 3 to 4 months, land use, all those kind of things. And then after that, hopefully construction's ready to go. And then that, will vary on the size of the project, but is typically about 12 to 18 months long, 14 to 18 months. So this is just to give you all an understanding that the things that we're showing tonight are really to get the dialogue moving and to get response. This is a process. We start big. It's, as we talked about earlier, it's an iterative process. So we want feedback, we'll recycle, we go back to you, we get more feedback. So it's a conversation. So we just want everybody to keep in mind as we talk and we ask questions, nothing is set in stone right now. It's just really to get that dialogue going and getting your feedback. So just want to make sure that people have that awareness as we get going. So tonight we're going to focus on some common themes, some groupings. We've read through questions. I know there were a few questions sent today, and I have to say those are not in here yet. We haven't had a chance to fully review those, but we'll plan to address those next week. But what we're seeing in a lot of the questions are really these kind of groupings of questions. And so we thought it would be helpful for us to form the conversations around those groups. So we want to deal with questions that you all may have about parking, access, traffic. That seemed to be quite a few questions about access points, how parking is arranged, how traffic may be impacted, which also relates to some of the site issues and park and the plaza. You know, there's questions about park program, about what the possibilities are for all the program pieces. Then we also want to kind of start from the outside, site-wise, and then work our way in. So we want to talk about building entry. Seems like we had a lot of questions about, you know, what entry means with impact to historic, have conversations about that, and then really talk about the bigger building exterior, the form, the bigger moves about the building exterior, relationships, grade, those kind of things. So next week we'll, and I should say there were other questions that were asked that really start to dive into the design phases that we'll get into later. Some of these things we don't have answers on yet. We will be asking those questions or getting that information, but we're not quite there yet. So we'll try to address some of those at the end, and then plan for next week for us to talk in detail about interior layouts, arrangement of program, considerations that have to do with the buildings on the interior side more so, and then get into more detailed conversation about cost. So we think these two will take a lot more discussion, and so we want to make sure we're saving enough time for those. So just for reference, we have our options up here that we looked at before. We have both the freestanding, the addition options, and then the no addition options, and we can go into detail on any of those as we need to. So I think I'm maybe going to stop sharing my screen, but if we need to pull it back up, I can easily do that. So I think we'll jump into the first section unless anybody has any clarifications before we get started. No hands? Great.
It looks like Dennis.
Dennis.
So just so I have my mind right, we're really in the process of coming up with the three best scenarios here, or alternatives here. That's really our goal at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, the charge I think you all have is to ask questions to clarify so that you're able to make a decision of the three most promising schemes that you think have potential for this site. That's the goal. We're in this phase is for you all to narrow it down to the three schemes that we're going to be going out to the public with and getting the public input on.
Okay.
Catherine,
Awesome.
do you want to add anything to that?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
You might consider that the alternatives don't have to be your top alternatives, but that they are alternatives that give the public a variety of options and ways to, different ways of thinking about the project that can inform a preferred alternative. So they could be very different options as opposed to three more similar ones.
Mm-hmm.
Kim, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
I know that you said that you were going to be covering cost kind of later, and I apologize for jumping ahead, but I feel like it really informs the way that we think about all of this. Could you explain how much of a budget we've had allocated at this point, if that's been set, or what are we working with?
Catherine?
So thanks, Kim. I know you asked that question, but part of this project is a master plan. As a master plan is also a feasibility study so that we can understand how much a building will cost. So there haven't, this is the first time we've really had an opportunity to dive into costs associated with a real project that could be built. There were some discussions early on, a long time ago, about cost per square foot for the library, which were priced at $300 a square foot. And even that probably is not relevant today because it was a while ago. Construction costs fluctuate a lot, up and down, mostly up. And so part of our work here is to find out how much the project will cost, and then also determine financial sources to pay for those uses.
So I guess, Kim, does that, and Grover, I see your hand, I'm going to get to you next. Kim, what I was kind of sensing is that it might be hard for you to kind of absorb this information without knowing what you're working with or what kind of the budget is you have play with, so to speak. But does that help? Do you think
It definitely helps. I think I'm just kind of thinking in terms of, you know, if these funds are coming from other programs or if they're, I'm assuming grants that are being applied, you know, et cetera. So just trying to think, obviously the world is different now than when we started this, you know, and big picture, like what are we looking at as far as impact on the community?
But so next week we will dive into a little bit about sources of money so that you can understand the different sources of money that we would have for both the library and NCPRD. And unfortunately, the sky is not the limit. So we do have to make sure that, and it's one of the criteria is that we all be stewards of good stewards of our finances, excuse me.
Okay, Grover, over to you.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. So I wanted to talk about an idea that occurred to me the night we did the basement work. And that was if we use the model of either 3, 4, or 5 from the existing so that the park is in the northeast corner and the parking lot is in the southwest corner. Using that as a basic format, I want to know about the idea of having a library. So building a parking lot, just like the one that shows, I am not exactly sure what the elevation at the moment, but just like the one that shows in option 3, 4, or 5. And on top of the north end of that parking lot, you built a library at the same level as the plaza level. So it's effectively, it's a second story above, but it is not a parking structure below, it's a parking lot. And what I most appreciate about that is it doesn't eat up so much of the overall space of the limited 6 acres. I don't know what's going on. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, I just pulled it up for you to look at, just to remind you that I can stop sharing.
Oh, you can. It's okay. As long as I didn't get disconnected.
Nope.
So the idea is put it in that kind of space so that it still has its own separate reality on the one hand. 2, it can be the library that the people who live here have been dreaming, considering, being disappointed about not having, etc., for 12 years. As much as the staff and whatnot have done to make our existing library experience as best we can have under the circumstances, it's not at all close to the standards. And this idea, the number of people who are looking forward to a new library, and most people don't know whether it's in the building or not. My point is, I'd like to know about the discussion of having that parking lot being pretty much like it is in those pictures, which I never saw come up. I don't know what's going on, but I have it here, and I think most people do. And it has that beautiful park up in the corner, up in the northeast corner. So I want to know, is that practical? Does it have to be a separate parking structure, or is it in fact a library built cantilevered? No, not that, on post beams or whatnot over the parking lot.
Well, I can take a stab at that. You're right, there is some grade across the site. It's not that dissimilar between the 2 freestanding library options, 1A and 1B. I think 1A, there's roughly an 8-foot grade change and something like maybe 9 feet. And that grade is going diagonally across the site. So in terms of
and also north-south, just to be clear, it does both.
It does. It's more subtle in the north-south actually, but there is some slope there. We looked at that carefully in terms of even estimating those 2 concepts. And the most cost-effective way to handle that grade change is up to a 5-foot height. It's most cost effective to do a retaining wall with backfill. So if you can imagine, half of that basement would be structured with fill and a retaining wall up to 5 feet. So that leaves roughly half of the rest of that level under the library that could be available, but you still have to excavate down further beyond the 5 feet, right? It becomes well, structured parking, you need about 10 feet to 11 feet clear, floor to floor. We're also, one of the things I didn't share last week, I was a little remiss on, was we're actually using a couple thousand square feet of that lower level under the library in the southwest corner as our mechanical room. So, pardon me?
I'm using model 1A.
1A or 1B, either one. And it may not be fully indicated in the drawings. Again, you know, this is early concepts, but we've discussed this with our mechanical consultant, and it just makes sense to take advantage of the lowest portion of that corner for a mechanical room. You can get vehicular access. There's still some minor excavation involved with that. So with that in mind, you know, we feel like the approach that we're sharing right now is the most cost effective. Just for a point of reference, we've done a number of buildings, obviously, that have parking under the building. That still qualifies as structured parking, you know, it does. And we talked to our cost consultant about this recently, and the cost per stall is $57,000 to $71,000 per stall versus on grade $9,000 to $11,000. It starts to add up to be significant, and to really put a dent and to achieve, I think, what your vision is, which makes sense. If you could pull all that parking that's up in the northwest corner of the site and pull it down to where we're showing the parking in the southwest quadrant, it would free up all this park area. But if you did that, you would be building a pretty significant parking structure. You know, we don't have to go into the cost on that now. We could share that next week, but it's fairly significant dollars to do that. And typically when you see structured parking, it's in a more urban setting where the cost of land is so expensive and the land constraints are so tight that that's what forces it. In this case, it would be the value of the parkland, which is what obviously, you know, you're most concerned about, which is a real valid concern. And then the question you have to weigh is, are some of the other options, do you have enough parkland? Is it worth, you know, we don't have to go into the cost right now, but you know, it would be very significant dollars, something we could share even next week when we talk about costs. But that's a little more information about the suggestion. It's a good suggestion because you walk out to the site and you feel the topography, and unfortunately it's not as cost effective as one would hope it would be.
Just a quick follow-up question. So there is a distinct difference, and to do the library above that parking lot, it would have to be a parking structure as opposed to a parking lot, and then you build a foundation that goes down through that parking lot.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. You have to have a concrete lid. It's a structured concrete lid with beams, concrete columns that come up. It's very different than putting, you know, backfill slab on grade, or, you know, you're excavating down quite a bit too, especially as you move your way up into the northeast corner of the library, either scenario. So that's why I'm sharing a bit of a cost range. It's still expensive, whether it's $57,000 or $71,000 a stall. You know, it's a big number. And we can certainly drill into it more and you know, provide more information on it, but hopefully that gives some clarification.
Correct, thanks. And it kind of goes with Kim's question. It's like, so where's the money coming from? Because no, I want it all, you know.
Right. No, I hear you. No,
Right.
it's about priorities, you know, and you know, ultimately it's probably finding that sweet spot where, you know, there's a little give and take, but you end up in a spot where most of the desires, goals, and aspirations are met. But that's for you to determine.
So,
Right.
Grover, thank you for kicking us off with some of these questions on parking and access. I know that there are a number of questions from folks that had to do with this cluster of both parking and access and traffic. So other folks that had questions in sort of that bucket that you'd like to get some clarity on. And feel free to just give a wave or go ahead and unmute yourself if you have kind of parking, traffic, access questions. I know they're out there. Yeah, Dan, there we go. Go right ahead.
Yeah, access did come up at the Oak Grove Community Council board meeting. And, you know, I'm not an architect or a landscape designer or a road planner, so I don't know all the nuances of where the buses are and how far. There was just a lot of expression of concern about how far somebody with limited mobility would have to go from the bus stop because it's down a ways on McLaughlin, or it's up on Oakfield to get down there, and then if they had to go all the way across the parking lot. So just to make sure there was some kind of accessible access as close as possible to the, in whatever way. I mean, not that we're going to put the library there because of that, you know what I mean? We have to do what's cost effective, but just whatever building we have to make sure that we do have close access for handicapped and people with limited mobility.
So I can address a little bit of that. You know, as part of doing a new project, whether it's a renovation or a new project, we have the obligation and want to be able to serve everybody. And so we are required as part of that to provide accessible access from the public street to the building. So that, and in the most straightforward way. So we would not say, have it in an obscure corner that you wouldn't be able to get to the site. It also has to be separate from the parking lot. So you wouldn't be going through the parking lot to get to the main.
Oh, good.
So just be assured that those things, those are required and are part of site development, and as well as slopes that meet accessibility. And I mean, Kurt can maybe talk a little bit more to that, but.
Well, I guess the only thing I would add to is that with each of the options throughout the park, accessibility is very important to us. So all of the pathways, walkways will meet current standards, and we'll want to make sure that there's good access to all the amenities that we provide, in addition to connections to the right-of-way and the sidewalks.
And one last point would just be that any short-term or ADA parking, accessible parking would be located as close as possible to building entries. Right. So we minimize the walk there as well.
Excellent.
All right, Doug, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious what the thoughts were as far as both Spalding and Olive, as far as access ways. I know Spalding, at least still last time I drove, I mean, even when our boys were going to school down there, it was in rough shape, but it's not gotten any better in the decade or so since then. Well, no matter what, would there be plans to repave that street? If I mean, I don't know if that's something the county would do because it's going to be start getting used once this new project is done. You know, and there's the residents along there as well. And I mean, I hate to, in some ways you make it, you know, my favorite fishing spot has right now it's got a nice long gravel road to it, but they've been paving sections of it. And I'm getting worried that the more they pave, the more people are going to start coming down. I don't want to, you know, I feel bad for the neighbors on that street if we start creating too much traffic. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't access a whole lot coming down Spalding, no matter what plan we look at, but still it will be there. And I'd say that's going to have to be improved to some degree. So that's part of my question. The other is, with Olive. I don't know what right-of-ways are come through that way and access, but for those of us who knew the school ground, that's for the most part, we either came in, actually the usual way to drop your kids off for school was to come in through Olive and then drive out up Spalding. So I'm just curious if you could address those.
I might take a pass at Spalding, and then maybe Jennifer, you want to hit Olive. But on Spalding, we've had a lot of discussion about it. Is that, we did layouts with a major parking area, even towards the east end of the site. And thought, oh my God, this is going to have way too much impact. And so the overall approach has been to really minimize and limit traffic coming down Spalding into the site. It is necessary in terms of emergency egress, emergency access for a fire vehicle or even an ambulance. If we got an event field there, if something were to happen, that's the open field where there could be movies in the summertime. So even having an area with some very limited parking where someone could come in to help set up a stage for a music event or a movie night. We're also thinking about it can serve some of the staff parking, can provide also catering and service access to the kitchen that serves the community meeting space, especially if it's located on the second floor of the 1948 addition. We've given some thought to where the kitchen might be. There would be a small bridge element going across, but that would be very convenient for caterers. There are also a set of stairs that already exist that take one down to the back entry on the east side of the 1948 building. Perhaps that becomes library staff entry capability. So there's a lot of benefits and reasons why we feel like we need to keep that Spalding access point, but we're really trying to minimize the traffic. Currently there's a road, Spalding goes all the way through, kind of unimproved, but so we hope, that there isn't impact on the neighbors. That's our hope. Whether the road needs to be improved or not is something that remains to be seen, but we're hoping that we aren't the reason why it needs to be improved, is kind of our strategy right now. But that's something to be confirmed with the county.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit more to that. The improvement of the road itself, it wouldn't typically be our responsibility to do that. That would be the county's decision. But the area that's within the circle that we have on the site, that is public, but likely we will be required to improve that area. So we just need to know that because it so much is enveloped by our site, the county will probably require us to deal with that, even though it's still public right away as the kind of cul-de-sac turnaround. That's about the extent that we would expect, and we'll get that confirmed when we do have our later meetings with the county. As far as access goes on Olive, obviously we have some schemes that really would depend on being able to get in or out there. Schemes 1A and 1B would be very tough to have that much parking and only have one or two ways in and out of the site. So it would be really critical. And I don't know if you have looked closely at where the property line is on those. We don't actually have a way to get to the property from Olive based on where the property line for Concord is. But I do know that Catherine has been kind of working behind the scenes to look at what options we may have with other property owners or getting an easement or that kind of thing. So, there are possibilities we can look into. We just don't have any solid word on any of that right now. Grover?
Oh, you're muted, Grover.
Can't hear you, sorry.
I am muted. I thought somebody muted me back. Okay, point being is that, so Olive stops at the property line. That because I'm looking at option 2 as an example, and it shows what appears to be the property line being the solid line, but it shows that the road sticks over onto the other. Is like Spalding is a public road within that circle. How far does Olive go? Does it stop right at the property line there?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit hard to describe, but what has happened is the street has a certain width, and the way that the properties are developed on Olive, they actually are encroaching on that width of that street. So when this Olive gets to the property line, it is vacated. So it does stop at the property line. But the way, usually when they vacate a street, half goes to one side, half goes to the other. So our property line that runs north-south is actually the center line of Olive. The problem is that because Olive hasn't been improved for a long time, it hasn't been expanded to the width it is actually legally designated.
So you, great point there. You said when the road gets vacated, half goes and half goes. What happened to the other half?
It's belonged by the property owners to the west.
So it did get vacated to them.
Yeah, it's already been vacated for a long time, as was Spalding.
Right. Has anybody approached the property owner for Walmart property there? I don't think Walmart owns it, but whoever does that, would they be willing to part with it?
So Robert, I've been in conversations. So there's 2 property owners. One is Walmart, and then the other is the other strip mall plaza there. So yeah, I'm in conversations with them now, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get it.
So I think it might be time for us to transition into our next cluster of questions, which is really to do with the park and the plaza. But I just want to make sure, I heard from a couple folks in that last piece, and I know that there were quite a few traffic and parking and access questions. If anybody else who has not had an opportunity to share yet had a question that they're sitting with that they'd like to get answered, now would be a great time. I do see a hand. Let me see who it is. It's Mark. Mark, why don't you be our final question, or you can kick us off if you're have something with Park and Plaza. Go right ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you. When I'm looking at these options, particularly related to the site, a couple things that come to mind, and I did ask several questions, and so I just wanted to touch on a couple of them. And one is just my concern about the Concord Road and the access from there, and the fact that Concord Road gets narrower the further east it goes, and how that's going to impact our access to the site, and how cars will queue on that street as they try to get into this property. So that's a concern to me. And I know some of the options suggest as many as 3 different access points off of Concord. And so I think in all of these schemes, those things can be worked out. I don't see that there's any fatal flaw there, but I think there definitely is issues we have to deal with the county about, how we get people on the site from Concord. So that's one. The other is, I am not a civil engineer or a landscape architect, so I am not up to speed on what the state and county requirements are for stormwater detention and retention. They are often really big issues in the state of Oregon, just because of federal regulations about the fact that you can't have water run off your parking lots onto the street. You have to do something with it. And so what I'm seeing in so many of the projects that I'm involved with is that storm detention, storm retention becomes a major issue on how the sites are developed. Mm-hmm. And so when I look at these options, there are conditions where that, some of those things can be dealt with easily and others not so good. And so, and I think that's the same with the parking issues about putting them somewhere where you're going to have to do a lot of cut and fill in order to develop them, and other schemes where you're not going to do very much at all. So I'm just looking at that and wanting a little more information, I think, from the design team about how you see those things playing out in these different options. options.
So I can answer some of your questions about
And-
access quickly.
And just maybe, I think it was a little hard to hear Mark. So Mark had two questions for folks
I
that
heard two,
I
yeah.
heard. One was really on the narrowing of Concord Road as an access point, and the second was on stormwater management for the sites and some of the issues that may be playing up in some of those schemes. So I think maybe we could try and briefly address these so we can make sure to get to
very
some other
brief.
buckets.
Yep. So Mark, agree. The access points will be discussed with the county. That's something that comes as part of our pre-application process, and it could be right. We have a couple different solutions on how to deal with that. And we would expect that we'd be putting a turn lane in to deal with traffic so it isn't stacking with through traffic. And there is the ability to do that. It just means we have to move our right-of-way upgrades over. So yes, agree that that is something that has to be confirmed. And also other options of kind of right turn onlys to get in and out. The stormwater question, I think we want to give Kurt a chance to speak to, but we are aware of that and would be expecting to plan for those. But Kurt, maybe you can just.
Yeah, just briefly, as part of our design team, we do have a civil engineer, and so we've already discussed square footages and areas that we'll need to accommodate stormwater. And remember, we'll have to do it both for the parking lot, but also the building. So right now we have begun to kind of look at areas that will kind of address that. And we think we have enough landscape areas, but certainly as we kind of move into a little bit more detail, those areas will be refined.
Great. So with that, Grover, I see your hand, but I'm going to give an opportunity first if anybody has not been able to share a question yet, and we'll get to yours. Moving into kind of park and plaza questions. Each of the schemes has sort of this plaza concept, and then we're also looking at the park space. Just looking around for folks, or if you want to raise your hand or let us know in the chat if you have a question on that. And I'll give priority to if somebody has not had an opportunity to share. And Shonda, if that person's you, just go ahead and chime in.
Okay,
I'm
thank
looking
you.
for. Okay, Jan, I see your hand, but I also know that you've had an opportunity, so I'm just gonna kind of see if there are any other task force members who have a park and plaza question who haven't had an opportunity to speak yet. You're a quiet bunch today. Okay, so I'm gonna go to Jan and then to Grover for the, oh, Christy, go for it. Okay, Christy, Jan, and then Grover.
So my question kind of combines the parking plaza and the parking issue. I know there's been a lot of advocacy for the soccer access for the youth sports. And knowing when I go to attend youth sports games, parking is always an issue. That's something I'm really concerned about. If parking is in 3 different areas and you have all of these parents coming in on the same day trying to get to their kid's soccer game, and I just see a lot of problems with having 3 different access points to the park, and someone goes and sees there's only 10 parking spots and they have to go drive around the block to go find the other parking spots. And I just know as a parent and kids sports that's going to be a big issue for people, and then trying to combine people who are actually trying to access the community center and the library also at the same time. So that's just something I see that I'm trying to look through a lens of all these designs and really try to see how that would work. So I don't know if I don't know how.
I guess, are you advocating for having less access so that it's clear where parking is, or are you advocating for more parking? I'm a little bit.
I'm not, I mean, I don't know about the parking. Do you think that having 3 different access points and kind of a dead end is better for people? Or do you think having all of the parking lots connected and having maybe a flow from one end to the other, people to exit? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think each of the options as they relate to that active use area have pros and cons. If you look at options 1A and 1B, when you split the parking areas across the site. Actually, the one on the north end is closer to that active area. So that could be an advantage for those first two particular options. What's kind of nice about the other ones though, and just having kind of a consolidated parking lot, is that when you enter into that area, you'll be able to realize if there's parking spaces or not. You're not having to exit out onto Concord, go over to Spalding. So I think having it in one generalized area actually offers a little bit better use in terms of understanding whether it's full or not. I think access to the active use area is really important in terms of pathways and sidewalks and making sure that it's convenient to access those areas.
Thank you.
All right, Jan, I'm gonna, oh, Kim, I see you had a comment in the chat, but I'm gonna go to you and then Jan, then Grover.
Just I put it in the chat, but Doug is encouraging me to speak to this, so I'll just say quickly that I really liked the idea of the convertible play space amphitheater, and I thought that it might be a nice place where if there's a need for inexpensive wedding venues, you know, for the community, or a potential theater option if there's the theater in the building goes away or whatever, it could be a really cool thing, especially combining it with a water feature. I like that a lot.
Kim, are you talking about the one that's in 1A? Or do you have a specific plan that you're thinking of that addresses that?
3, 4, and 5.
1A, yes.
Yeah. And I just want to mention too is that, you know, the amphitheater isn't just exclusive to that particular option. If there's a lot of consensus that that is a really important part, certainly we can look at that for options, you know, 2, 3, and 4, and figuring out a way to accommodate that as well.
Jan, why don't you keep us moving with your question?
Am I on mute? Oh,
you're good. We can hear
okay.
you.
This might just be a silly question because I don't know how to read architectural diagrams, but on there's on option 2, North Library, East Gym additions, it's got like on the field plus 233 and then on the steps plus 232. Is that an elevation?
Yeah, that's not a silly question at all. No, that's a great question. Yeah, we don't have individual contours because we thought we really wanted to make these plans as clear as possible. So those are relative elevations, just to give you an idea of the topography as it runs across the site.
Okay, great. Thank you. I was going, okay, does that mean that's a regulation football field or no? Okay.
Good question.
I just want to add one clarifying. Someone did ask a question about what is the size of that red circle on the active area. And Kurt, do you want to just?
Yeah, it's 100. It's approximately 100 by 150 feet.
And that is a U9 size soccer.
U9 soccer field. Yeah. So both. It's important to understand the size for the soccer field, but also just in terms of kind of general acreage or width, really being able to allow a lot of flexible uses, kind of movie nights that are out there right now. So just wanted to be able to share that approximate size with each of the schemes.
So we've got a couple questions coming into the chat that I want to share with the rest of the group, but I know Grover's had a question and has been waiting. So Grover, over to you, and then we'll share some of the chat questions.
I want to tag on that water runoff. On a site tour of that site, all the water runoff that's coming from the east uphill side is excessive. There's already a whole lot of water that runs onto the site. And having dealt with all the planning around where I live and the number of people who don't feel we've been protected from water runoff, et cetera, it's an issue. So my question is, given that site, given the amount of, what do you call it when you water things? Anyway, you got to water all that stuff. Is there any chance to use any of that water, either engage in a water feature on the one hand, but also to irrigate? Because I know around here, the cost of water keeps going up, and it's blowing me away. So that's my question. And then I had a second part of that question, which I'll wait until it's my turn again.
Kurt, let's, I don't know.
Yeah,
Kurt-
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm here. I just got cut
He had
off
to
for a
go
second.
water his
No,
lawn.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, water everywhere. We have a lot of water. But you know, we've done irrigation systems where we capture the water, and the trick is that we get so much water during the winter months. It's how big of a collection or how big of a cistern do you need to collect all that water, and then that cistern empties out pretty fast once we hit the summer months. So certainly I think it's something that we can look at. And reuse of water, even if it's maybe for flushing toilets or anything with the building associated with that, I think it's something to look a little bit closer at.
And
Right.
it certainly speaks to our sustainability goals that we will be defining for the project. So it's a good one to keep in
Definitely.
mind. That's
Definitely.
a really good one.
I
to keep
totally agree.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Gray water. Yay.
Allison?
So Paul had a question. Oh, it looks like I see a hand from Dennis as well. But Paul had a question on if there's a goal or threshold for the amount of parks and green area for NCPRD, and that might actually be a Scott question.
I would love to answer that question.
Go for it.
Yes, well, you know, there's not a specific goal in terms of this amount of square footage or acreage, but you know, obviously the site has a lot of competing needs and ideas here. I would say that our goal is to maximize the open space to the best that we can, preserve as much of it as possible, but we want to balance that with the indoor needs, both the library and the recreation needs. I mean, we're really going to be doing kind of a balancing or a juggling act of finding that sweet spot of maintaining as much or maximizing as much of the open space as we can, but still meeting the needs of the indoor spaces. So that's really kind of the overarching idea I think that we're looking at. What we do know is that this particular part of our district is in need of more parkland, and that was one of the justifications for purchasing the Concord site, not just the school building, but also the open space needs that we have in that part of the community. So it's really a balance of finding that sweet spot of maintaining enough of our open space that we can provide some good, a good park area, but also, you know, still meeting those indoor needs. So that's going to be an interesting part of the process, I think, to figure out where that sweet spot lies.
We also had a comment stroke question from Mark Elliott in the chat, kind of noting whether things like a farmer's market could be utilized in that plaza space, or you know, sometimes those are used in parking lots. I know in Oregon City, farmer's market happens in a parking lot, but that could be a potential use for the plaza area. And Dennis, it looks like you also raised your hand and had a question. Go right ahead.
Just a quick question on a couple of these examples here. I'm wondering, what is this? It's a safety question. So between parking or the the two parking lots, the street or road between the two, what kind of barriers or whatever are used on those area to keep a car from careening in there or something? I'm assuming there's something there.
I mean, I'll hit that quickly. Maybe Kurt, you can elaborate, but there are definitely traffic calming measures. I mean, you can change paving materials. You can lift the paving up so it's flush with the top of the curb. Those are all techniques, but it doesn't preclude the amount of people moving back and forth between the buildings. You know, it creates a somewhat safer scenario, but as we all know, we walk around with these devices looking at them without paying attention to our surroundings. And so it's still a risk, you know, there's, you know, you can do all the traffic calming you want, but all it takes is one incident, and, you know, that would be unfortunate. And we do live in a time when people are more distracted, walking around not paying attention to their surroundings. So if that is a selected scenario, believe me, we'll, as we get into schematic design, we're going to be looking at various techniques to calm traffic down and mitigate that condition. But the condition doesn't go away.
So the question was really, thank you, that's helpful. But right, if you took the plaza and if there's a parking goes through or a street goes through, are there barriers logged in on the plaza so you couldn't drive a car into the plaza, I guess is what I'm saying, inadvertently?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great question and probably gets into a little bit more of the details. Certainly, we could look at bollards. Could be a potential option. Even kind of raising. Definitely, you'll probably have a raised curb. Whether there's vegetation. So there might be some other kind of visual cues that we employ as well.
Holly bushes.
Clung to the salt rocks.
I suggest, I know we're kind of running short on the time we have left. It goes by so fast. I'm thinking maybe, Allison, I'm not trying to jump the gun here, but we could combine the building entry, historic, and exterior issues kind of as a more encompassing conversation that we can also follow up on next meeting if we need to.
Yeah, that's the great part of having two meetings is whatever we don't get to today or more questions that you're sitting with, we can always come back to next week.
Yeah.
So thank you. Rose has put some comments and thoughts in the chat as well on ways to make sure that the neighbors are also happy and included in this process. So thank you for that, Rose. But as we move into, as Jennifer suggested, questions about building entry, about some of the historic features, and the building exterior, which was a hot topic. I think a number of you sent in questions that have to do with this. Again, I'm kind of looking for, if folks haven't had an opportunity to chime in yet, and they do have questions that relate to any of these topics, or just something that you're sitting with, I think really anything's kind of fair game at this point. But thinking about historic features, thinking about the building exterior, and the building entry. Anything that, anybody want to chime in with a question and kick us off?
There were lots of questions.
There were.
We can just start if.
I mean, we can just talk about it a little bit.
Sure,
Obviously, if that's all right. We were looking at two options for the west entry into the Concord school. And as you're all aware of, the existing lower level is down 2 foot plus, kind of buried into the grade. And currently the primary access is through the kind of more monumental central stairs, exterior stairs going up. So this is a public building that really needs to have universal access. Everyone should feel welcome. So that's one of the challenges. And so we looked at two options and actually had input from Matt Davis, our historic architect on the team, who's also on the historic review board and very, involved with SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So he's a great sounding board and advisor in terms of what is a reasonable approach. So one approach is certainly to maintain the existing central entry point. There's something valid historically about that, but to make it accessible, you really need to remove those central stairs. And that then creates a very inviting entry, but the stairs are a primary feature. I mean, you could also, we didn't show this, but you could keep the stairs and tuck in an entry behind the stairs, kind of excavate down, in which case that entry becomes kind of a second-class entry. It's kind of hidden behind the stair, so not inviting. He feels like this approach that we showed, probably removing that such an important feature as that monumental stair would probably be viewed less favorably by SHPO. The other option we showed was the entry at kind of the northwest corner and in the knuckle of the L. We positioned it there because it's the most kind of removed visually from as you approach the building from Concord Road. It's in a little more subservient position so it doesn't visually detract from the integrity of the original building. The thought is in that location, operationally, it's in an ideal location because it's right in the kind of crotch of that L shape, which allows you as you come in to have equal monitoring and supervision of all the circulation. So that's an ideal entry point. It also is next to kind of the solid brick wall that is a gable end at the north end of the facade. So that becomes a good backdrop. The approach was to work within the existing opening, the major brick opening at the lower level. So we're removing some of the smaller brick piers between windows, but basically regulating ourselves to stay within the confines of the major kind of brick opening of the facade, and then maintaining the brick lintel between the first floor and the second floor with a canopy that's a very kind of very simple, understated design. These are all attributes that Matt Davis thought were very sensitive to the building and would be viewed favorably. What really announces that entry is going to be a lot of the landscape work that Kurt would do in terms of the feeling of an entry plaza, walking in at grade. Certainly the transparency of having larger windows there that are across the whole length of that horizontal opening. And so we think it'll, and the fact also that the accessible parking, handicap parking that was talked about would be directly in front of that entry plaza. So those are a couple of the approaches that we were looking at.
Can I just add one thing, Jim, to your comment about what SHPO's purview is in this, and that is that obviously we will be having discussions with them. They don't say yes or no. It is a negotiation, and if they see that we are affecting something that is considered to be historic, they will want us to make sure that we mitigate that in different ways to also pay tribute to the historic pieces of the project. So it's really about a balance of, if we do this, let's make sure we do this. So it's about that kind of a negotiation. So I just want to make sure people don't think that we're in this thing where they can just say, no, you can't do that. Yes, you can. But it is a negotiation and about how we address the historic nature of the building in more than one way. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah.
That I think NCPRD
Allison, I have a
supports.
question.
Yeah.
Allison, I have a question.
Go right ahead, Shonda.
If both entrances were to be constructed in 2, 3, and 4 options, would they both be open and accessible anytime the building is open and accessible, or would you have trade-offs?
They would be open anytime the building's open. That would be the main public entry to the building. And you could, the way the library and options, I think 2 and 3, into really option 4 too, it can be closed off from the rest of the building. So there's separate secure access to the library. The location too of the NCPRD offices and the welcome desk provides kind of another level of kind of monitoring and supervision, which is certainly a consideration for a building like this, which actually benefits the library, that there's a set of eyes and monitoring of who's coming in the building before they walk into the door of the library. So there's kind of an added benefit to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We also have some kind of comments and questions in the chat. Looks like some agreement. Paul had suggested that if there are these 2 entries, is there a strong feeling about the common entry of the library, and can those 2 entries have kind of a separate identity? And Doug also had a question: if there was a new main entry, you know, how do we make sure that people aren't kind of put off by those potentially scary looking stairs? So I'm curious if we want to take on either of those.
Yeah. Well, it's possible to create a separate library entry and community center entry. In fact, we explored that. They tend to be so close together, and operationally, you really want to, if possible, create one entry point where you have a set of eyes monitoring who's coming in, a lounge area and comfortable seating that can serve everyone who comes into the space, as well as restrooms and other amenities that are right there that everyone wants to use, whether you're going to the community center, NCPRD offices, or the library. There's just tremendous efficiencies with having one point of entry. And these entries aren't that simple anymore because they're vestibules. I mean, it's actually a room that you have to walk into. So now you're creating two vestibules very close together. And it can actually create more confusion for someone coming to the building. You know, saving the monumental exterior stairs, that does have, you know, some operational considerations. Certainly, we talked about a little bit the last time, but it doesn't preclude that you could have that set of doors at the top of the stairs be open. It may be more of an operational issue of, let's say, the community center is up above on the second floor, hours that NCPRD wants to have it open. If it's basketball night, those doors may just be open and people just cruise up the stairs. So having obviously some sort of signage near those stairs, I think would be important, as well as I think there's a lot to be said for how the landscape is handled that kind of draws certain visual prominence away from those stairs. They're still there and they are prominent, but I think there's things that Kurt can do as well, landscape-wise, that might give more emphasis to the entry that's in the northwest corner.
And you know, not only planting, but thinking about site furnishings such as benches, how we deal with lighting. I think those are also other cues that we can begin to really kind of enhance the other entry as well.
Can I follow up on my question there for real quick?
Yeah,
Jim, I appreciate the answer, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And my question was kind of whether, in your opinion, one common entry makes more sense than two separate identities. And you answered that very well. The other thing, I don't know if you guys looked at potentially the new entry being in, and I'm looking specifically at option 2, about that new entry being part of the expansion in option 2. To give kind of a different look to it. You know, you're not trying to carve it into this other building. You're not trying to put it somewhere where it's not, you know, and the trying to come into the lower level. You can make of it what might be a better opportunity, and then potentially even link it internally up to the next level, up to Spalding.
Yeah.
But just a thought, you know, I know we're not at that stage, but didn't know if you guys had looked at that.
Yeah, we did. And I mean, we'll continue to look at it, I'm sure, as well. But part of the idea is to take advantage of the NCPRD district offices. They're going to have a reception area, and if that person can actually be cross-trained to also be kind of the reception to the building, there's real efficiencies there. And so the relationship of the NCPRD offices to that vestibule is kind of key. There's a community resource room that wants to be near there. Lounge area, elevator. We're actually suggesting maybe the north stair, historic stair, is retained. It's kind of part of the integrity of that building. And that stair is right there. So in terms of like all these attributes and things that you want to have near an entry kind of exist there. And so that's where we were struggling when you move the main entry over to the addition. But, you know, it's a great question. And one I'm sure we'll continue to look at.
Can I add one quick thing, just because I know we're running short on time? There was one question that I think we need to address as part of this conversation because it's a bigger picture. And I'm going to call on maybe Scott and Candy. Someone asked a question about does NCPRD have other places for a large gym? Or I think it might be good to have a little conversation on NCPRD's thought about this property versus other properties that it owns.
Great, sure. Well, I'll try to be quick, and if we need to talk more about this at another meeting, we can certainly expound upon that. But I would tell you that from the staff perspective, we are excited about the option that there could be a new gym addition as a part of some of these options on our plans. It would provide a tremendous opportunity for the Park District to provide services that we can't currently provide. And there's a number of reasons we could talk about that. Candy is here, and she could probably tell you a lot of the positives about the programming part of that, but specifically, Jennifer, to your question about the location in terms of could it be on a different site? Does it need to be here? I would just say that what is attractive about the potential to add a new gymnasium onto this site, especially if we were able to keep the existing gym and add a second gym, the new gymnasium. There's this programming synergy that we could do in conjunction with this whole community center idea where it's all in one place. It's not spread across different places in the district. We would be challenged to find a good location where the gym could be built as a standalone facility. We could explore options, but we have ownership of this property. We have some options that show that it is a possibility to put it in this footprint without significantly impacting the open space. That kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about balancing the open space versus the indoor space needs. And it really then kind of brings having all of those together where you have the new gym for sports and recreation and the existing gym for maybe more arts and culture activity focused things, or using the gymnasium, the existing gym as a great room. It's the focal point. It's really one of the focal points of the current building, and maintaining that and still having that new gym to provide all those things. So I don't know if we want to get into all the programming reasons why it's important tonight, but I can just tell you from a kind of a big picture perspective that there's just a lot of synergy for having these all together, if that's a possibility, and if that's where we end up going. So I'll kind of leave it at that. And like I said, we could drill down more on that. I'd like to have Candy give you a perspective, maybe not tonight if we don't have time, but at another meeting, perhaps next week, if we could hear from her to speak more about the program elements and for people to really understand the need for these types of facilities. So
I know we're running short on time, I think, and I could talk to you guys a lot about, programming and the needs, but I think something, and I don't think Scott pointed out, but gymnasium is one of the things that's been in our master plan for a long time. And it is something that's needed. It's been pointed out, and it's in our current plan. And so having an opportunity to actually build the large gym, which is something that is needed for our community, is really important to us. And pointing out the opportunity that the small gym, if that's all we have, it's going to be packed with things. So allowing us more opportunities for multi-generational things and community events and festivals and things like that would be an added benefit for that location. And again, when we talk about the inside, I'd love to share opportunities of, how it could be programmed and benefit the community.
So we are at about that time in the agenda when we roll into the next steps. I'm guessing that some of the topics that we had outlined for you that we're hopeful we could get to tonight, we'll just roll into our next meeting. And we'll also be looking at that important topic of cost next time, and then some of those interior features as well that I think Candy will be joining us next week. And we've got Mitzi in the wings as well to talk about kind of library and Parks and Rec interior programming. So lots to look forward to in the next meeting. I just want to note that there's been some great comments in the chat. Rose had a question. that came up. And I, in my initial read, I thought it was just a comment, but it actually was a question about outreach to neighbors and if that would be happening or when it might be happening. And Catherine, if you just maybe want to speak to that briefly, so we can make sure that gets recognized.
Yeah, so yes, we will specifically reach out to the neighbors. We'll probably do that with flyers or postcards or something like that, because that is really important. And they're going to be our neighbors. We are going to be neighbors for a long time. Also, just so you know, when we had our first open house, a lot of the neighbors came. So I think they're really excited about it too. Obviously, though, traffic impacts are always a big deal. So we'll have to pay attention to that.
So Catherine, I think you and I probably have some next steps to talk about. You want to kick us off? Did I talk about their home?
I'm going to share my screen. I can't. Cool. Okay, can everybody see that? Yep. I see Jennifer's head nodding. That's the only one. So it's the only one I can see. So I just want to keep us informed about where we're headed and the next meeting. So we have, I've got all of these three meetings we've got here on the 11th, the 18th, and the 2nd are scheduled. They're at our favorite time and location. So the 11th, 18th, and then we get a week break, and we have one on July 2nd. So next week's Q&A, then we are going to use the criteria to narrow it into to 3 alternates, which we will send out for public review. July 2nd, the yes/no recommendation for should the Oak Lodge Library be located on the Concord property, and review the draft survey, which is going to go out later that in July, later July, right? And then we were thinking we would have a board policy session, keep our commissioners up to date on the project. It would also be a nice time to tell them about all of the work we've done so far, including the work on the master plan and narrowing the alternates to 3 and the recommendation for the Oak Lodge Library property, depending on what it is. We'll play that one by ear. Then the summer, later in the summer is going to be public input, and then August, September, we will have a final evaluation, selection of a preferred alternative. The design team will then have more work to do for refining the preferred alternative, and then we will you will make the recommendation to the board for their consideration to accept it. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm trying to keep these up to date on the agenda, but every time I get ready, we refine it a little bit more. So just want to keep you in the loop.
Okay. Doug, are you okay if we roll into public comment? Great. So there was a piece of written public comment that was received that I believe will be distributed with the task force members. Kind of looking to Catherine, but it was a letter from the Oak Grove Community Council. I'm kind of looking to Jan. Jan's nodding. Yes. Okay, that's correct. Okay, great. And also note some of the mobility concerns that Jan has mentioned today. So that will be circulated with the task force for you to read at your leisure. But if we have anybody here this evening who'd like to give public comment who's been watching, I know Mike kindly let us know that Commissioner Savas had another meeting, so he had to leave early, but I think he was present and with us for most of the meeting this evening, so we're sorry to miss Commissioner Savas. But anybody here who would like to give public comment, if you can raise your hand or press *9. Okay, I see one hand. So Jeffrey, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak. So hello, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Hey, I actually wouldn't mind hearing that letter. I wonder if that letter was intended on being read at the meeting as a form of public testimony. So would somebody please read the letter?
I don't have that letter handy to read. I can summarize by saying that it is some of the comments that Jan raised about being sure that advisory groups and commissions that the county has that work specifically with issues for people who are for older adults and people experiencing disabilities, that they have an opportunity to weigh in on these plans, and that mobility in general is considered as a part of the selection of a preferred alternative and the project moving forward. That's my best summarization. I believe that will be circulated very soon after this meeting and posted online. I do not have that letter handy to read right now, so apologies. But Jeffrey, you can go ahead with your public comment.
Oh, that was my comment. I wonder if it was the intention of the OGCC to have that read publicly.
I can, Jeffrey, it came in late.
Corner.
Jeffrey?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. It came in late today. I apologize. Tell you what we'll do is I'll send it to Doug so he can read it at the next meeting, which is next week.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm going to put you back on mute now. Anybody else who's here for public comment, if you would like to raise your hand or press *9. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to go ahead and close our public comments and hand it back over to Doug.
Okay, see you next week. I guess that's it. Well, thanks. I mean, it was good to start airing some things. I would like to see, that's kind of why I kind of encouraged Kim, even though she was just kind of saying, I like this. I think the design team would love to hear what, even if it's not a question, what are we liking? Because that's going to help inform some feedback, some direction. So make sure you're sharing not just questions, but thoughts if you've got them. It also helps to know that there's some enthusiasm for the projects and certain elements. Because as Kurt mentioned, the part that Kim was really liking, which I thought was really a cool element to that 1A plan, might be able to be something we can incorporate elsewhere. So keep your minds open, your options open, and keep sharing your thoughts. I was glad to see the discussion from everybody here. So we'll be carrying that on next week. Look forward to seeing you guys then.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
See you next week.
We're totally excited about all these designs, I just want to say.
Great.
Yay!
Nice.
It's like someone gives you a gift and you're like, which part shall I comment on first?
That's a good problem.
Yeah. I'll find
It is
another
good.
hat.
Thanks,
for
everybody.
Okay, goodbye.
Ooh, I love that we get
Thanks,
it.
everybody. Bye.
Good night.
I'm staying. I want to see all these comments that kind of came. I feel like there's a couple
I know, there's so
things
many
at the end.